It's wonderful to have our four panelists here. I'm just going to go down the line here, asking our fellow panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell us about a burning issue, about water that's on their minds. And of course, there's very full bios for them in the app. So, Mike, over to you.
Tēnā koutou, ko Mike Jebson, tuku ingoa. Thanks for the opportunity, Rob. I've been around the issues of water for most of my career, both in the policy space, but also working in terms of QE2 to protect it. There are a few things I want to talk about in terms of water. I've been involved for the last few months in a report which was about water availability and security in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It was a bit of a deep dive into the issues, and what we found was quite significant. Most of you will probably be aware that the primary sectors use about 3/4 of water taken out of rivers, and that's been based on levels of reliability, some quite high, some quite low. But what we know in future is that level of reliability is going to go down, and it's going to go down for two reasons. It's going to go down because of climate change, the impacts of on New Zealand. We've already seen a trend of New Zealand being down 10% in terms of natural water over the last 25 years. The other thing that will affect this is the rollout of the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. Those regulatory constraints being put in place now over the next few years to address the issues with water. They're also going to start to bite on the reliability of water for productive uses. That's going to be a real challenge for the country. So while most primary sectors will have access, that's going to be severely limited. And the solutions of the past aren't going to cut it for the future. We're going to have to look at both the demand and supply issues around fresh water so that we can address the challenges, so that we can position the sectors to respond to climate change, to reduce their nitrogen emissions, and also build their resilience in the face of climate change. These are real challenges. And as part of that challenge, the work that we did was recommending partnerships be developed both at a national and regional scale with all the key players, iwi, hapu, whānau, regional councils, NGOs, the science community, and obviously the users of water to work out what are some of the solutions to the challenges we face. It's a big challenge, but we've got to address it. Otherwise, we're heading for rocky waters.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mike. And Christina, over to you.
Tēnā tātou katoa. I'm Christina Robb. I work for a huge company of myself, so I'm here saying what I think. I've had exposure through the private sector, the irrigation sector, central government, local government, more recently the science sector, and also working with Ngāi Tahu on freshwater. So my mindset today is around environmental regulation, and I am impressed with the innovation and the optimism that I see in this conference and all the things that's going on, and I'm reflecting on how it feels to be involved in environmental regulation at the moment, and there's a lot of angst and there's not a lot of trust, and it's quite fraught, and I'm trying to think about how the two things can be brought together and how we as a country can see environmental regulation as a positive part of the story that we're going to tell internationally. I'm interested in how it fits in, given that we've now got consumers and growers talking to each other about sustainability and environmental standards. I'm also interested in the things that we need to sit alongside environmental regulation. We can't place everything on it. In terms of some of our freshwater improvements that we need. So that's what I'm thinking about. That's my burning mindset at the moment. Thank you.
Fine, thank you very much indeed. And Brent, over to you.
Thanks, Rod. Water is my passion. I grew up surfing here at Waimari Beach, not 10 kilometres away from here. I now live in Palmerston North. So my scientific career has not been around the salt water, but it strangely has come back a bit more saline recently, as I'll explain, and add a dollop of soil and look at the kind of issues that Mike and Christina have raised. We work in that space. But I'd like to refer to a quote from US Vice President Kamala Harris, who on the 1st of June said the US is a safer place if people in other countries have sufficient water to drink. grow food, and safely dispose of sewage, emphasising that water access is a foreign policy priority. She said the Biden administration will support investments in water infrastructure abroad and provide technical expertise to other countries help manage their water resources. Which brings me into a point that with Plant and Food, I've been working in Kenya under a New Zealand aid project, working with smallholder farmers in the Central Highlands to better manage their avocado production with water without community irrigation schemes. We also have, under a G2G agreement in the United Arab Emirates, working with Environment Agency Abu Dhabi on managing a fossil groundwater resource that is becoming more saline, and also how they can use alternative water supplies, desalination units, as well as treated sewage effluent. So water is a global issue that we've been working on, and Plant and Food works in that space internationally. You will have seen our work in Vietnam in the display here.
Indeed, thank you. And am I right that you figured out about how much to water a date palm?
Yeah,
Could you just tell us briefly about that?
Well, how much water a date palm uses,
Yeah.
because there was no understanding of how much water a date palm uses. And so we actually went for a very short project in the United Arab Emirates, a 2-week stint, and we've been there ever since 2013, still going, because they don't use as much as they thought, and they were putting on 3 times as much as they needed.
I find that story completely amazing, because you think in a desert country you'd be very water conscious and you'd have worked out over the generations how much water to put to your date palms. And so the fact they've got that so wrong really worries me about what we don't know yet here in Aotearoa.
Well, but that's sort of a skill set that we've developed here in Aotearoa. You know, when you look at a date palm, you say, on a hot day of 45 degrees, how much water is it using? It's not easily seen with the eye.
Yeah.
So we've got some kit that we do, and so a little bit of magic in there as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for your comments, and thank you, Hilton, for your excellent presentation, and very, very, very fundamentally important, setting all this into Ao Māori worldview, and on Mataranga Māori and the rest, because these are deeply, deeply interdependent issues. So thank you. Can I just ask an overarching question, if I may, which is, we've been at water now trying to sort it out for some decades, well, at least intensively, the last 15 years or so, and it's always been fraught, and we've had various attempts fall over. What's for each of you is the sense that we have seemed to have turned a corner, we seem now to be on a track where we might be able to make some good progress? Just as sort of an overall view on that as to whether we are actually now progressing and we're on the right track. Mike.
Well, I think from what I can see on the water quality side of the equation, I think there has been good progress both in what farmers can do themselves, positively, as well as in regulation. I think we've still got a way to go in the water quantity issues and allocation, and that's been that's quite challenging because of issues like Māori rights and interests in relation to fresh water and the interests of people who currently have access to that water. But that's the next big challenge I think that we really need to deal with. We're dealing with a bit of a two-legged stool at the moment. It needs to have all those issues addressed.
Yes. And I'm going to come back to one particular aspect of that. Christina.
Yeah, I think that the recent set of reforms have done 3 things which I think are really important. One is Te Manaroa Te Wai, and I get the focus on why is not necessarily quite right, but Te Manaroa Te Wai has done 2 things. It has set up a system where the waterway comes first. That's the first time that's been in the National Policy Statement, and I think that will have a difference. That will definitely make a difference. The other one is a real strong push for a role for Māori in decision making, also bringing through. But they've been there for a while, but they're much tighter. And the other one is a focus on the whole ecosystem, so mahinga kai, wetlands, fish passage, all those things are coming in, which hopefully can move us away from this sort of single contaminant type thinking that we've had. So I think those are really important changes. They will take a while to roll out, and my plea really is that we try and roll them out in a way that doesn't get too complex, gets really clear about what we're trying to achieve, and can we just let them roll out without having another change coming on top of us? Because every 3 years is a change, and so it's quite hard when you're in the middle of this to keep up. So that's my...
Yeah, thank you. Brent?
Yeah, could I add another perspective on this? When we seem to talk about farming, we seem to think about farming and all the changes that go around it. But if we look at the Productivity Commission's report of 4 or 5 years ago, we look at the Climate Change Commission, we look at the putative National Policy Statement on Productive Soils and Urban Lands, land use change in the future will not look like it is today. And so land use change will affect the demand for water. Not all land uses use the same amount of water, and they don't all have the same demand for water. I see a question come up there on de-intensification. It may not be de-intensification. It might simply be moving land use to a more profitable type of land use that uses less water.
Yeah. And Hilton, that sense of where we are on this journey.
I'm quite pessimistic, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think in a country where we have so much water available, the way we treat our water is we assume it is an infinite resource that we can continue to use for our benefit. Often in farming forums, I make comments about what gives us individually the right to assume we can take a communally-owned asset and convert it for private benefit. And we need to realise water is fundamental to all of us. So why aren't we reframing our thinking and our water usage before we have a critical issue, before we find it is short, before we find it is polluted? We have options around and choices we can make today. I think the challenge is for us to embrace those opportunities before we are forced to. And yet when I look at Western cultures, too often, it's when we're close to the point of failure, we respond. And I think we need to reframe that.
Yes, absolutely. And if I may just add an urban perspective to this, as a wholly urban person who loves to be out in wild and rural places also, I hasten to add, is that, I'm horrified that our solution in Auckland is to just pump more water out of the Waikato River, for example, when we have all these impermeable surfaces. And our idea of water engineering is to pump stormwater and sewage all the way back across the city to Mangere, or one of the few outlying processing plants. It's completely crazy, and we're just not addressing that water correctly at an urban level either. Sorry, that was my little urban rant. Anybody want to contribute to that urban rant?
No, that's an interesting point. So one of the projects we were working in Abu Dhabi is because prior to the discovery of oil, the Arabs were desert people and fisher people. They treat their sewage effluent to an exceptionally high standard so they could put it in the Gulf to protect the fisheries. We just build a longer pipe at South Brighton and stick it out to sea. It's a resource.
Yeah, and with the work that we were doing in terms of water availability and security, the challenges aren't just for the primary sectors, it's for everyone. When our overall water, natural water is going down, and the ability to take water is being constrained because of the need to protect the environment, that creates less of an opportunity to use that water. With urban growth, that's going to be an issue for city dwellers as well as those people out on the land. It's an issue for everyone.
Thank you. And talking of legs still missing on the stool, we are still not approaching water at an overall national societal level in terms of Māori principles and views on this. But that seems incredibly fraught. I mean, we're already seeing that in the Three Waters project with government. What might be some ways that we can actually get to grips with that issue so we can really be doing the fair, right and principled thing fundamentally about water?
It's about relationships and connections. It's very hard to talk about those people who live in Auckland, Rod, because we don't know them. Yeah, you're just an Aucklander, a Jaffa, there's a whole lot of things. But as soon as I can eyeball Rod Oram and I say, look, I know this guy, he's a great guy. I know he's trying to do his bit. Suddenly, it's about how between us we start to figure out what that solution for the future looks like. But until we recognise New Zealand's a small country with 5.5 million people, we're probably all related. We need to work out between us, what do you need, what do I need, and how do we make sure we look after the environment, as opposed to me sitting here saying, I've got a water take permit, I can take my 500 cumecs, and I'm not worried about anyone else. I don't need to take them today, but I've got the right. It should be about Rod's in trouble, he needs a hand today, let's help him. In Te Aukaha Māori, that tends to be the way we operate because of those relationships. And my acknowledging our connection to Tahu Pōtiki, to Ngāi Tahu, there will be times when reciprocity rolls. We need to think more through that kind of lens.
Yeah, Mike.
I completely agree. We're all in this together, and like some of the solutions are hard, and it does require conversations where everyone sees benefit for them. It can't be just some winners and a lot of losers. If we go down that track, that's going to be disaster. We need multi-benefit, multi-use solutions, and solutions that work for the environment as well as for users of water.
If I may just say one thing, I proudly wear the Jaffa badge because I'm just another farming advocate. But I'm obviously very misguided because sometimes on my bike I think I'm just another fantastic athlete. Anyway, on to far more enlightening things. A very, very interesting but particular question that's been coming through there from a person, and I will read out their name and then I next see the question come up, about how hard it is to get consents to build water infrastructure, i.e. dams, on farms. Should that be much more of the solution? Are we missing something in there?
I think storage is part of the solution, but you can't just rely on storage. You've got to look at demand management, and if it's only storage for individual uses, that becomes challenging, and it's also a lot more expensive as a way of storing water. Some of the work that I've seen, it's triple the cost of storing water at farm scale than slightly bigger community scale. And when you do that community scale, you can build in electricity, hydrogeneration, environmental flow, supplementation, community water supply, reliability, as well as water for industry and irrigation. So I think storage has a role, but we just can't rely on storage because the number of sites that you actually can do storage is pretty limited around the country.
Is there actually a natural ecosystem benefit for having bodies of water, in the landscape? Wetlands is obvious, but
it depends.
Storage.
If some of that water is used to buffer low environmental flows when rivers are getting really low because of drought conditions, that can have real benefits for the environment. So that can be part of it.
Thanks.
I think also sometimes we can come up with a solution if we do it well through our local relationships.
Yep.
But then we can come up with a solution which may or may not be storage, might be little farm dams, big ones, and then we don't make that very easy to actually achieve.
Yeah.
We squash it through a consent process that you've got to go back to all the time. So maybe some of these solutions, if we can get them enabled in a more collaborative, cooperative sense, we could make them easier.
I agree entirely.
And as Mike was saying, if we do have those storages, then how are you going to use? Because those storages will dwindle through the summer. So as you get to the end, so what sequence of plants would you grow to maximise the value of that storage and maximise the economic return and the environmental return on low flow augmentation, as Mike was saying?
Yes, thank you. That was from Gerhard, always for that question, so thank you. This is a data question about how can regulations be designed so that farmers don't have to worry about data management. This is picking up from a point that Yasir was making earlier. It feels like the greatest challenge of regulations today is just being able to get the data to comply, and that's a question from Blair.
Don't we have monitoring on all our water takes above a certain level?
Yeah, we do.
Yes.
I mean, I agree with some of the principles that were discussed in that data management, and I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a thing about the regulation. It's about carefully thinking about the data that the regulators need, and then there are many people out here who are doing solutions about how to get it to them for the right thing, but that's a byproduct of actually some tools that farmers can use. That's how I see it.
Thank you.
I actually think the biggest problem is the way we think about data collection for compliance. I don't understand how you can make management decisions without collecting data. And certainly we have to comply with the same regulatory environment, but when we get data, we think, okay, so that's our benchmark, how do we beat it next time round? And I think it's just in the way you think about what you're trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve is a better environmental income for everyone.
Thank you. This is a question from Daniel Mack. What aspects of freshwater most require technology innovation? And he's naming management systems, freshwater generation, i.e. desalination, analysis, technology, or others. I would imagine in others, though, there'd be some profoundly important things we've still yet to learn about natural water systems in terms of flows and how land responds to that water. So yes, where is some big areas that we need a big technological push?
Well, in the Middle East, and well, of course, the MENA countries, Middle East, North Africa, desalination's massive. The growth in it and the technology is rapidly improving. It's happening in Australia, but I'm not sure that we need it here. I think there are better things that we can do with our natural water resources through better management, and that was in there around, I think we can better manage our water without having to revert to desalination. Something around treated sewage effluent, maybe.
The other aspect, I think, is getting a better understanding of our groundwater resources. There has been some electromagnetic mapping of that in some localised regions, but we still haven't got a full picture of how our systems work, how they connect, if you're taking groundwater, how it's going to affect the river flows in some systems. I think there's a lot more we could do in that space as well, understanding the basics of the resource.
The great benefit of brief questions is they come up really big. It's almost as though you're shouting. So Dan, I'm sure, wasn't shouting when he said, should there be ownership of water?
So yes, we all own water.
The state.
We all have a responsibility to look after the water.
So it's a collective ownership.
It's a collective ownership.
Someone has to be a guardian of it, and it's the state.
Yes.
That's a different answer.
Yeah.
And the state is a treaty partner.
Yes, to both, because it comes down to a community responsibility. I mean, there needs to be some sort of oversight, and so we get some commonality of approach across the country. But at the heart, it's about a community responsibility in a catchment or in a city or in a neighbourhood, if it's all urban, about using water properly. But does that then immediately rule out any kind of economic mechanism, i.e. can you have collective ownership or then pricing of water in some way? I mean, so we obviously do because we pay to get water out of the pipe. But I'm trying to juxtapose economic instruments with different styles of ownership.
Well, first of all, Māori don't have an ownership model. What they have is a model that is about responsibility for looking after the resource. So that's my comment about the guardianship. So that's my first comment. My second comment is, I think we can still price water. It's how we decide to apportion and distribute that profit that I think is a fundamentally different question and a different discussion. If we're using it for the good of everyone, I think that's a different kind of solution. But if we're doing it, simply put a couple more dollars in my pocket, then that's exactly the same example of using communally owned assets for individual gain. And I would think we'd find that unacceptable.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off the clapping. Look, one last question, and I'm selfishly going to ask one that kind of haunts me. I always thought the Land and Water Forum was a brilliant approach to all of this because it got everybody around the table. There was a lot of effort went into building those relationships and understanding between people. They came up with a great body of work, but then it fell over at the last stage because the way that sort of process works is that a government says, okay, if this is collectively what you want, this is what we'll legislate. Well, that didn't happen. We had a government that picked and chose. So am I being too romantic about the Land and Water Forum and its work, or is that a model that tells us a lot about how we can actually progress?
Well, in the work that I've been doing, I regularly go back to some of those reports because there were some real gems in the work that the Land and Water Forum did. I participated in the first two of the Land and Water Forums, and they brought people together for the sort of conversations that were needed, and we need more of those conversations. So I absolutely support that sort of approach.
But it also needs to be reflected locally too, and local communities need to do a similar process. So it can't be solved, in my opinion, nationally without that similar discussion happening locally.
Yeah, the work that we have recommended is a core at central government, but then partnerships in each region as well, working on the unique circumstances of regions and their aspirations.
I'm a bit of an optimist. Hilton sort of maybe, but it seems a wider societal problem these days. How do we have respectful and constructive kōrero on difficult issues? And I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we could, not if, when, as soon as possible, we crack that, it will be a great relief, and we'll be able to get far more done far faster. Anyway, on that optimistic note, a very big hand for our panel, please. Thank you very much indeed.